For God's sake, Caroline, I'm not canceling our Taylor Swift tickets. We've been waiting 6 months for this concert. My mother's voice blared through the phone, echoing against the sterile walls of my hospital room. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling as the drip in my arm pulled uncomfortably with each small movement. The fluorescent lights above made the tears welling in my eyes shine like tiny crystals as I struggled to comprehend my own mother's indifference. It was a Wednesday afternoon at Boston Memorial Hospital. My 3-year-old twins, Mason and Madison, were quietly coloring in the corner of the room, occasionally looking up at me with their innocent blue eyes, James's eyes. They were too young to understand the gravity of the situation, too innocent to know that their grandmother had just chosen concert tickets over their well-being. Nurse Heather adjusted my blood pressure cuff while giving me a sympathetic glance. "Mom, please," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady for the twins' sake. "The doctors found internal bleeding. The surgery is tomorrow morning. I don't have anyone else to watch Mason and Madison." "That's not our problem, Caroline." My father's voice suddenly cut in as he took the phone from my mother. "We're retired now. We've earned the right to enjoy our lives without constantly bailing you out of your messes. Find someone else." "My name is Caroline Mitchell, I'm 34 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been fighting for scraps of attention and love from my parents. My younger brother, Ryan, has always been the golden child, Harvard Law graduate, married to a surgeon, perfect suburban house in Connecticut with 2 perfectly behaved children. Meanwhile, I'd been dismissed as the family disappointment since choosing art school over my father's alma mater, Princeton. Now, as I lay in that hospital bed facing emergency surgery for a ruptured ovarian cyst that had caused internal bleeding, I was once again reminded of where I stood in my family's hierarchy of priorities. My parents couldn't even be bothered to drive the 2 hours from their lake house in New Hampshire to Boston to care for their only grandchildren while I underwent surgery that, according to Dr. Lambert, carried a concerning amount of risk. The irony was crushing. Despite their apparent disinterest in my life, I'd been supporting my parents financially since they took early retirement 3 years ago. Every month, without fail, I transferred $2,000 into their account to help with their mortgage, property taxes, and the boat maintenance they couldn't actually afford on their retirement income. Even after James died 18 months ago from an undetected heart condition, leaving me a widowed single mother struggling with grief and financial strain, I kept sending the money. I did it out of some misguided sense of familial duty, believing that family should support each other no matter what. How wrong I'd been. As my father's cruel words hung in the air, Nurse Heather gently squeezed my shoulder. "My sister runs a daycare center nearby," she said softly. "Let me call her. She might be able to help with the twins during your surgery and recovery." I looked at Mason and Madison, their little heads bent over their coloring books, their dark curls, so much like mine, falling over their foreheads. They'd already lost their father. What if they lost me too? The thought sent a chill through my body that had nothing to do with the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. "Yes, please call her," I told Heather, my voice finding new strength as I made a decision. "And could you bring me my laptop? I need to make some changes to my banking information." With those words, I began severing the toxic ties that had bound me to my parents for far too long. As Heather left to make the call, memories flooded my mind, a lifetime of being overlooked and undervalued. When I graduated with honors from the Rhode Island School of Design, my parents attended the ceremony but spent the entire time talking about Ryan's internship at a prestigious law firm. When I married James in a small, tasteful ceremony at a vineyard in the Berkshires, they complained that the drive was too inconvenient and the venue too rustic. Even when the twins were born, they visited only once, staying at a hotel rather than our guest room because babies are too disruptive to our sleep schedule. They held Mason and Madison briefly for an obligatory photo, then handed them back and spent the rest of the visit scrolling through their phones and discussing their upcoming Alaskan cruise. James had been my rock through it all. Having grown up with an alcoholic father and absent mother in rural Mississippi, he understood family disappointment on a bone-deep level. "We'll build our own family," he would say, his voice soft and sure. One filled with all the love and support we never got. And we did. Our small brownstone in Boston's Charlestown neighborhood became a haven of acceptance, warmth, and laughter. Then 18 months ago, James collapsed while jogging along the Charles River. A congenital heart defect no one knew about, not even James, took him from us in an instant. At 32, I became a widow with 18-month-old twins, a mountain of medical bills despite our insurance, and a grief so profound I sometimes couldn't breathe through it. Yet I continued supporting my parents, even increasing the monthly amount when they mentioned wanting to renovate their kitchen. I wanted to be better than them, to show that family supports family through thick and thin. Now, as my health hung in the balance and they couldn't miss one concert to care for their grandchildren, the stark reality of our relationship finally crystallized in my mind. Heather returned with my laptop and good news. My sister Diane can take the twins after her daycare closes tomorrow. She has twin boys of her own, just a year older than yours. Her husband Jeff is a pediatrician, so they're in good hands if anything comes up. Relief washed over me, followed by a wave of gratitude so intense I felt fresh tears spring to my eyes. "How much will this cost?" I asked, anxiety creeping into my voice despite my relief. Between mortgage payments on the brownstone, the twins' preschool, and the lingering medical bills from James's death, my graphic design business barely kept us afloat. "Let's focus on your surgery first," Heather said kindly. "Diane and I can talk about arrangements later." I nodded, but my mind was already calculating. The $2,000 I was scheduled to transfer to my parents next week could instead pay for childcare during my recovery. The thought sparked something within me, a long-dormant sense of self-preservation. With shaking hands, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. First, I canceled the recurring transfer to my parents. Then I opened my email and typed 3 sentences. "I will no longer be providing financial support. My children and I deserve better than being your afterthoughts. Please don't contact me again until you're ready to be actual parents and grandparents." As I clicked send, I felt something unexpected beneath the pain and disappointment: liberation. The surgery the next morning was more complicated than anticipated. What should have been a 2-hour laparoscopic procedure turned into a 5-hour open surgery when the doctor discovered that the bleeding was more extensive than the scans had shown. I had a previously undetected second cyst that had also ruptured. I spent 3 days in a morphine haze, drifting in and out of consciousness. When I was lucid enough to check my phone on the 3rd day, I found 34 missed calls and numerous text messages, most from my parents and brother. My parents' messages followed a predictable pattern: confusion, then indignation, then panic about their finances. "What do you mean you're cutting us off? Is this some kind of joke? Caroline, you're being ridiculous. Call us immediately. We've already put a deposit down on a Mediterranean cruise for next month. The payment is non-refundable." My brother Ryan's messages were different and unexpected. "Caroline, what's going on? Mom and Dad are freaking out about money. Why aren't you answering? Are you okay? I just talked to Mom properly. She mentioned you were having some minor procedure but wouldn't give details. What's really happening?" It dawned on me that my parents had likely downplayed my medical emergency to my brother, portraying me as being dramatic and difficult rather than admitting they'd chosen concert tickets over their grandchildren's safety during my life-threatening surgery. With Heather's help, I managed to type a response to Ryan. Hi Ryan. I had emergency surgery for ruptured ovarian cysts and internal bleeding. Doctors said it could have been fatal if left untreated. Asked Mom and Dad to watch twins during surgery. They refused because they had Taylor Swift tickets. Told me I was a burden. I've been paying their mortgage for 3 years. Not anymore. Recovering now. Twins are with a friend's sister. His response came within minutes. What the hell? They told me you were having an elective procedure and being dramatic about needing help. I had no idea it was emergency surgery. Are you okay? Do you need anything? I can fly up this weekend. I believed him. Despite our parents' obvious favoritism, Ryan had never been cruel to me. We weren't close. The 7-year age gap and different life paths had created distance between us, but he wasn't malicious. He had simply been raised in an environment where he was taught that his needs and accomplishments mattered most. By the time I was discharged 5 days after surgery, I had made several major decisions. First, I accepted Heather's sister Diane's offer to keep the twins at her daycare at a reduced rate during my 6-week recovery period. Second, I hired a part-time nursing assistant to help me at home for the first 2 weeks, using some of the money I would have sent to my parents. Third, I contacted my lawyer to update my will, designating my closest friend Megan as the twins' guardian should anything happen to me, definitely not my parents. And fourth, I blocked my parents' numbers on my phone, allowing only Ryan limited contact as I assessed his sincerity. The financial implications of my decision were significant. The $2,000 monthly payment I'd been making to my parents represented nearly a quarter of my income as a freelance graphic designer. Without that burden, I could actually build an emergency fund, pay off James's medical bills faster, and perhaps even afford the art therapy sessions for the twins that their preschool counselor had recommended to help them process their father's death. On my first night back home, after Diane had brought the twins back and they'd fallen asleep in their beds, I sat on our small balcony overlooking the neighborhood. The Boston skyline glittered in the distance as I sipped chamomile tea, my incision site still tender and bandaged beneath my nightgown. My phone pinged with a text from Ryan. Just had a massive fight with Mom and Dad. The truth about what happened is significantly different from what they told me. I'm staying at a hotel tonight. Can we video chat tomorrow? I want to see you and the kids if you're up for it. Maybe I wasn't completely alone after all. 2 weeks after my surgery, I was slowly regaining my strength. The incision was healing well, though Dr. Lambert had warned me it would leave a scar across my lower abdomen. The home health aide, a kind woman named Gabriella, came for 2 hours each morning to help with the twins and light housekeeping while I worked on graphic design projects from my home office. Ryan had flown up from Connecticut the weekend after my surgery, bringing healthy meals he'd prepared and frozen for us, plus new toys for Mason and Madison. Our relationship, once distant and awkward, was cautiously warming as we bonded over our shared recognition of our parents' toxic behavior. They always made it seem like you chose to distance yourself from the family, Ryan admitted as we watched the twins play in the small garden behind our brownstone. I never realized they were the ones pushing you away. I was beginning to see my brother in a new light, as someone who had been manipulated just as I had been, albeit in a different way. While I'd been made to feel perpetually inadequate, he'd been put on a pedestal so high he could never safely climb down. Then came the knock I'd been half expecting. Looking through the peephole, I saw my parents standing in the hallway outside my apartment. My mother was clutching her designer purse, a Chanel bag I'd likely helped pay for, while my father stood with the rigid posture of a man unaccustomed to being denied anything. I hesitated, heart pounding, before opening the door just enough to speak through the gap. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "Caroline, darling, we've been so worried," my mother began, her voice dripping with sugary concern that had never been present during our phone call from the hospital. "You haven't been answering our calls, and we needed to make sure you and the children were all right." "We're fine," I replied flatly. "Now if that's all, it's not all," my father interrupted, pushing slightly against the door. "We need to discuss this ridiculous financial situation. The bank called about our mortgage payment, and we had to use our emergency fund to cover it." The audacity was breathtaking. No questions about my recovery, no concern for their grandchildren, just demands about money. "I told you I'm cutting financial ties," I said. "I meant it." "But sweetie," my mother pleaded, her voice rising in pitch, "we've come to depend on that money. Your father and I adjusted our lifestyle based on your commitment to help us." "My commitment?" I echoed in disbelief. "I've been sending money out of guilt and obligation while you couldn't even watch your grandchildren during my emergency surgery." My father's face darkened. "That's not fair, Caroline. We had plans." "Plans more important than my children's safety? More important than my life?" I replied, anger rising in my voice. "Do you know what the doctor said? There was a chance I might not survive that surgery." "Did you even bother to ask?" Their silence was answer enough. "We made one mistake," my mother whispered dramatically, a perfectly manicured hand pressed to her chest. "Are you really going to punish us like this?" "This isn't punishment, Mom," I said, feeling a strange calm overtake me. "This is consequence. I've spent my entire life seeking your approval and support, and in my moment of greatest need, you chose Taylor Swift tickets over helping me." "We're your parents," my father interjected, his tone shifting to demand respect. "And I'm a parent too," I countered. "I would never treat Mason and Madison the way you've treated me." "Never." Just then, Madison toddled into view, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant. My mother instantly switched tactics. "There's my precious grandbaby," she cooed, bending down. "Grandma brought presents." Madison, unfamiliar with these relative strangers, backed away and looked at me with uncertainty in her eyes. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. "When I'm ready to talk, if I'm ever ready, I'll reach out." "But the money," my father started. "Is no longer your concern," I finished, gently closing the door. The next morning, my parents returned with reinforcements. My Aunt Susan, my mother's younger sister who had always positioned herself as the family mediator. "Caroline, honey, let's be reasonable," Aunt Susan pleaded from outside my door, which I had not opened. "Your parents are struggling without your help. They managed their finances for decades before I started helping them," I replied through the door. "They chose early retirement knowing their savings weren't adequate." My mother's voice broke in. "We made those decisions because you promised to help us. We've had to cancel our cruise, and now we might lose the house." Their attempts at manipulation were so transparent now that I'd stepped back from the fog of guilt they'd surrounded me with for years. When had I ever promised lifetime financial support? I'd offered to help temporarily after their retirement, but somehow that had evolved into an expected permanent arrangement. "Mom, Dad," I said firmly, "I'm recovering from major surgery and caring for 2 toddlers. This conversation is over." Later that day, I received a group email from my father addressed to our entire extended family, detailing how I had abandoned them in their time of need after they had sacrificed everything for me. The email conveniently omitted their refusal to help with the twins during my emergency surgery, instead painting me as an ungrateful daughter who had suddenly cut them off without reason. What they hadn't anticipated was the backlash. My cousin Jessica, who lived near my parents in New Hampshire, replied to the group, "Uncle David, didn't you just buy a new boat last month?" And Aunt Margaret, "Wasn't that a new diamond tennis bracelet you were showing off at the 4th of July barbecue?" Other family members chimed in, many privately messaging me to ask for the full story. Even Aunt Susan called me directly after learning the truth. "I had no idea about your surgery," she admitted. "They told me you were just being dramatic about some routine procedure and using it to punish them financially." Meanwhile, Ryan had fully taken my side after witnessing our parents' behavior firsthand. He helped me craft a single, factual response to the family email thread, simply stating, "I recently underwent emergency surgery with a significant risk of complications. My parents refused to watch my children during this time because they had concert tickets. I am now focusing on my recovery and caring for my twins without additional stress or financial burden." The support that followed was overwhelming. Cousin Jessica dropped off home-cooked meals. An aunt I barely knew offered her services as a part-time babysitter free of charge. Ryan started spending every other weekend at my apartment, getting to know his niece and nephew properly while helping me recuperate. Most surprisingly, Heather from the hospital connected me with a support group for young widowed parents. Their first meeting was held via Zoom so I could participate from home, and for the first time since James died, I felt truly understood by people who had walked my path. My parents' financial situation, meanwhile, deteriorated quickly. They had indeed been living beyond their means, counting on my monthly contributions to maintain their lifestyle of travel and luxury purchases. Ryan discovered they had taken a second mortgage on their house a year ago to buy their boat, assuming I would continue subsidizing their primary mortgage indefinitely. "They've been lying to everyone," Ryan said, shocked after helping them review their finances at their request. "They're not destitute, they're just overspent. They'd be fine if they sold the boat and the vacation timeshare in Florida." Their increasingly desperate voicemails and texts continued, but with each passing day, their hold on me weakened. I was building something new from the ashes of their betrayal, a genuine support network based on mutual care rather than obligation. 1 month after my surgery, a major unexpected twist occurred. My parents received a foreclosure notice. Ryan called to inform me, his voice a mix of concern and exasperation. "They're in complete panic mode," he explained. "The bank is giving them 60 days to catch up on payments, or they'll lose the house." "What about their retirement funds?" I asked, bouncing Madison on my knee while Mason napped. "Mostly depleted. They spent a chunk on that boat, then invested the rest in some scheme Dad's golf buddy recommended. They lost almost everything," Ryan sighed. "I'm not saying you should help them, Caroline. I just thought you should know." Later that evening, I received desperate texts from both parents, now abandoning all pretense of concern for my well-being and openly begging for money. My mother's message was particularly revealing. "We never thought you'd actually cut us off. We assumed you were just angry and would start sending money again after a week or two." Their assumption that my boundaries weren't real infuriated me. All those years of putting their needs before mine, of accepting their mistreatment, they had never respected me at all. Meanwhile, my own life was transforming in unexpected ways. The support group had become a lifeline, connecting me with other parents facing similar challenges. Through them, I met Andrea, a real estate agent whose husband had died of pancreatic cancer 3 years earlier, leaving her with a 4-year-old daughter. She helped me consider options I hadn't thought possible, like refinancing my mortgage to a lower rate and using the savings to increase my emergency fund. I'd also started a small side business designing memorial websites, inspired by the one I'd created for James. Several members of my support group had commissioned sites, and word was spreading. For the first time since becoming a widow, I felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. The contrast between my growth and my parents' collapse became even more apparent when they showed up unannounced at my apartment again, this time with a detailed spreadsheet of their debts. "We need $178,000 to catch up on the mortgages and avoid foreclosure," my father explained, his usual authoritative tone now tinged with desperation. I invited them in, not out of obligation but because I was curious to hear their perspective now that they were truly facing consequences. "What about selling the boat?" I asked, gesturing for them to sit at my small dining table. "We'd take a loss," my father protested. "And the timeshare?" "We've tried, but the market is terrible," my mother added quickly. "Besides, those are our retirement luxuries." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "Luxuries you can't afford." "We could afford them with your help," my father countered, his tone hardening. "It's the least you could do after everything we've done for you." "What exactly have you done for me?" I asked quietly, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. The twins chose that moment to toddle into the room, Mason clutching his favorite truck and Madison babbling happily. My parents' expressions softened instantly. "There are our precious babies," my mother cooed, reaching for Madison, who promptly hid behind my legs. "They don't know you," I stated simply. "You've seen them 3 times in their lives? You chose not to be involved." "That's not fair," my father protested. "We're busy people." "Too busy for your only grandchildren? Too busy to help your daughter through emergency surgery?" "But not too busy to ask for money," I observed. "I think that says everything about your priorities." My mother's face crumpled, whether from genuine emotion or calculated manipulation I couldn't tell anymore. "Without your help, we'll lose everything," she whispered. "I lost my husband," I replied, my voice steady. "My children lost their father. We survived. You'll survive too." 3 months after my surgery, my parents faced the inevitable. They were forced to sell their lake house to avoid foreclosure. Ryan kept me updated on their situation, though I maintained my distance. They had managed to find a modest condo in a retirement community, significantly downsizing from their 3,800 square foot lakefront property. My father had reluctantly sold his boat at a loss, and they had finally unloaded the timeshare for a fraction of what they'd paid. "They're actually blaming you for their financial problems in front of everyone," Ryan informed me during one of his weekly visits. "It's bizarre to watch. They tell anyone who will listen that you abandoned them after promising lifelong support." "Let them talk," I replied, feeling surprisingly unbothered. "The truth speaks for itself." And it did. My extended family had largely rallied around me after learning the full story. Even my father's brother, who had always taken his side in family disputes, called to express his support after hearing about their refusal to help during my surgery. Meanwhile, my own situation had improved dramatically. With Andrea's help from my support group, I had successfully refinanced my mortgage, reducing my monthly payment by $400. My memorial website business had grown enough that I could reduce my graphic design clients and focus on work that felt meaningful. Diane still helped with childcare 3 days a week, but I'd adjusted my schedule to maximize time with Mason and Madison. Most importantly, I'd found a community. Neighbors brought casseroles when they learned about my surgery. The support group organized playdates. Ryan had become a genuine brother rather than a distant relative. Even Heather from the hospital occasionally stopped by with her children. I had lost my husband and cut ties with my parents, yet somehow I felt less alone than ever before. 6 months after my surgery, I received a letter, an actual handwritten letter, from my mother. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won out. Inside was something I'd never seen before, a genuine apology. "I've had time to reflect on my behavior," she wrote. "Watching you build a life without our help has forced me to confront some painful truths about myself as a mother. I was jealous of your independence, your resilience. I resented that you didn't seem to need me the way I needed my own mother. But now I see that you did need me, just not in the ways I wanted to be needed. When you asked us to care for the twins during your surgery, you were reaching out, and we failed you completely. I'm deeply sorry." The letter continued, explaining how they had completely restructured their finances. My father had taken a part-time job at a local hardware store. They had sold most of their luxury items and were living modestly for the first time in decades. She didn't ask for money or even forgiveness, just acknowledgement of her apology. I showed the letter to Ryan, who was skeptical. "They've been talking about writing to you for weeks," he said. "Dad was against it at first, but I think he's starting to see things differently too, especially after his heart scare last month." "Heart scare?" I asked, concerned despite myself. "Just high blood pressure and chest pains, but it scared him. He's on medication now and actually following doctor's orders," Ryan explained. "I think facing mortality has humbled him a bit." I wasn't ready to respond to the letter immediately. I needed time to process my feelings. Was this genuine remorse or another manipulation tactic? Had they truly changed, or were they simply adapting their strategy? That night, I looked at old family photos for the first time since cutting ties. Behind the smiling faces, I saw patterns I'd been blind to before. My parents had always been performers, playing the role of perfect parents while serving their own needs first. A year after my surgery, I finally agreed to meet my parents at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near my home in Charlestown. When they arrived, I barely recognized them. My father seemed smaller somehow, his confident posture replaced by a humbler demeanor. My mother's designer clothes had been exchanged for simple, practical attire. The twins were with Ryan for the afternoon. I wasn't ready for a family reunion just yet. We sat in awkward silence until my father did something unprecedented. He cried. "I've been a terrible father," he admitted, his voice breaking. "And an even worse grandfather. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I see it now, how selfish we've been." My mother reached across the table, not quite touching my hand but gesturing toward it. "We've spent months in family therapy," she explained. "It was Ryan's idea, and we resisted at first, but it's been transformative. I didn't rush to forgive them or make promises I couldn't keep. Instead, I shared pictures of the twins and told them about our new life. They listened without interrupting, without making it about themselves, perhaps for the first time ever. As we parted, my father asked quietly, would it be possible, someday, to know our grandchildren? I considered this carefully before answering. That depends on your actions, not your words. If you're genuinely committed to change, we can start with short, supervised visits. But understand this, my children will only have relationships with people who respect their mother. Walking away from that meeting, I felt neither the crushing weight of obligation nor the burning resentment that had defined our relationship for so long. Instead, I felt something new, the calm assurance of a woman who knew her worth, who had created boundaries and would enforce them without apology. Whether my parents could truly change remained to be seen, but I had already transformed from a daughter desperate for approval into a mother fierce in her protection and clear in her expectations. The journey had been painful, but the freedom on the other side was worth every difficult step. As I walked back to my brownstone where Ryan was playing with the twins, I realized something profound. The family I had now was the family I had always deserved. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't what I had imagined, but it was real, honest, and built on genuine love rather than obligation or manipulation.